Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review the pilot episode of Loki. So, I have come with glad tidings to free you from freedom, and so on and so forth. Really, we have Loki in this episode, and this is the cryptic, talking, of course, up front. The speeches and the talking is almost every little bit of kind of copy and paste of the first Avengers film within this episode. We also have it to where, really, in this episode, it's basically a take the time to recap this person's entire history through any other film that has been done. Really, and kind of hearing what is eventually going to go down the rabbit hole of this show, I am immediately just not quite that interested. It's not that I have to be really won over by every single one of these film or Disney Plus shows. I immediately am like, I've never really been satisfied with most of these Disney Plus shows, with the exclusion of Falcon and Winter Soldier. I thought that show, for bulk of it, was good quality enough, whereas immediately Loki kind of strikes me as like the WandaVision kind of quality of a show, where reasonably it's like, hey, like, we're again trying to clickbait people to come into this show because they know Loki from prior films and prior things. That's what I feel about this character in this pilot episode. Whether that changes via episode to episode, because I'm going to try and watch the entire season of this, because really I've just tied myself on to trying to view these Marvel shows regardless of my enjoyment level of them. I would honestly say to a lot of people, wait till Moon Knight comes out. Really, I think that the style of that show will very much remind us of a Daredevil kind of show. And I think a lot of people will be excited about that. Plus, really, it's a new character that people haven't seen through a bajillion other movies and bajillion other things. So I think they're going to probably put their best foot forward with that show. Whereas, She-Hulk might be fun, but really I think that they're probably going to have to desperately try and maybe have Mark Ruffalo in the pilot episode, so the pilot episode may be interesting. But probably further beyond that, we are probably just going to have a She-Hulk episode that I think is going to be desperately trying to be too much of a court kind of show, and less of a hey man, this is cool, I can't wait for me to see what She-Hulk does action wise. But yeah, so this Loki show was not very impressive going out of the gate. Really, we have it to where this story feels very like the simplest thing that they could ever do, in all honesty. Really, we have Loki who comes from grabbing the Tesseract from the end of Endgame to now just forcibly being told that, hey, what you're doing is now a variant and it's wrong, and now you should be punished for that. And we have to figure out what the heck your villain is in this show. And what the villain is goofily in this show, I kind of scratch my head going, why? Because immediately, I guess the villain of this show is not something that I am at all excited about. I think it's fairly lazy. And I'm hoping that there are other villains that are to be presented within the show. So right now, I'm not really won over by the show. This show has to double over backwards and give me something that I am going to enjoy. I assumed that Loki was going to uh, put together a Asgardians of the Galaxy kind of team together, or some kind of like Asgard like team through certain time loops and whatever, or certain time periods. Like I assumed, since Loki is going to be a variant in time, like I assumed that he was also going to pluck people from other times to help him be able to fight somebody, and that could still quite possibly still happen, but uh, really, I just think that they're really not getting my not getting my attention thoroughly to just be like, man, I can't wait for next week's episode. Like, I could really probably forget that this show is even on, and then just like, oh yeah, it's on. Oh, I'll watch another episode. Oh, that's great. Like, but I have to like these Marvel shows are important to a lot of people, and some people might have a variety of different opinions. Some people might have said, no, this episode was awesome, and a lot of people will be like, hey man, it's just the pilot. Like like if anything, there's still more to come. Like, being too harsh on this show right now, I completely understand that. I completely understand that kind of disagreement of how people felt about this show. Um, I can just say that this show is a start. It's not like it's not a good start. It's just an okay start. It's like, really, for me, like, at least this pilot might have been better than the WandaVision pilot, because this show actually tells you something. The WandaVision show, that pilot tells you jack crap nothing, and then you're just like, what is going on? And then you're spending numerous episodes like, what is going on with this? And you have to come up with every single one of the answers. Whereas this show, they actually kind of deliver you some pretty decent explanation out of the gate. So I guess I can applaud them for explaining things, because they could have left you completely in the dark, and you could have just been um, with Loki and Mobius this entire time, and do the whole recapping of what Loki's life has been like. Here's your life, Loki. The things that you have done already, the things that you are going to do, and the things that you are getting to the point of having being done to you. That's basically this episode in a nutshell. Is really just focused on that, and that Loki is a time variant. We have some Easter eggs in this episode, which I do actually enjoy. But the like, really, for this show, I was just kind of like, okay, let's just get this review over with, in all brutal honesty. So I think it's about that time to go into spoilers about this episode, because yeah, there is not a whole lot to say. Anyways, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this show. So right out of the gate, I'm not thinking that there's going to be another, like, there could quite possibly, like, I don't think that there's going to quite actually be like, there could be an Asgardian of the Galaxy kind of thing that Loki could set up in this show. But I also could go on and say that they are also going to quite possibly do nothing with Loki, and could just have him just be working with Morbius, or Mobius, and this is going to be a really just boring show. Uh, so let's go on into the very beginning of this. So we are to see Avengers Endgame footage. I say that because it looks like shots that are taken from Endgame, and we infuse different points in time where Loki is looking at people at points in time when he wasn't originally in that movie. I don't know if they had planned that since Endgame, or really those were just archive shots that they kept to eventually use somewhere later, when maybe they were even thinking about doing a Loki show during Endgame. I don't know. But anyways, we have Loki, who eventually in Endgame, of course, a lot of people know, he ends up taking the Tesseract and he ends up going into a different spot. So we have Loki, who is to Tesseract his way onto a different part of the country. And so we immediately have these Minutemen, or this time force, that is coming to Loki, and they're like, oh, no, 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 no. Like, you have created a variant. You've created a time anomaly. And so we need to have you go and seek judgment with the time police, or the time force, or whichever, whatever they're freaking called. I don't know. Like, if anything, there's a lot of like, there's explanation, but like I couldn't understand like the names of it all, like what actually like everything breaks down to being in this time hierarchy. It also seemed that Loki was very baffled and confused, and he was just like, yeah, this just sounds ludicrous. And so we have Loki, who is to go on and get this necklace here that is shown here, that is to basically, when Loki uh, is to try and attack them, the Minutemen reverse time so that way Loki does not attack them. So like, it's kind of like hey, like, you better obey us or you're going to get reverse time and be forced not to attack us. So we have Loki, who ends up going along with this system. Eventually he is to be put through the system of these time people. And first off, he is to sign numerous papers mentioning that these are every single word that he's ever said in his life. And so Loki's like, what? And so the guy has to Xerox a thing saying what? And so on and so forth. That's how exciting that this episode is. So we have Loki, who says nothing and signs away every word that he's ever said in his life. And so we have Loki that is to eventually go through what is to be a scanning robot device, to where we have it to where they're trying to check whether or not that this guy is to acknowledge that he is a robot or not. So Loki is like, well, like, it's kind of like those old-fashioned computer things where like everyone has to like security you to see if you are a robot or not. So you have to pick these certain pictures and then okay it. But this is just going through a magnet device to see if Loki is a robot or not. And Loki's like, well, what if I don't know if I'm a robot or not? And so he's like, well, like, if you are a robot, then this device will kill you. And it's like, oh, okay, so hopefully I'm not a robot. Hopefully I'm not a robot. Loki goes through. Nothing happens. He's not a robot, I guess. So pushing on. So eventually we have Loki, who is to go through this, like one of these like bank like lines where you have to go through these numerous like little loops of or like at an airport where you have to like kind of go into these line things where you have to kind of like go like back and forth, around and around and around, even though you're the only one there. Still, you have to go through these stupid kind of rungs and mazes and whatever to get to a person to give them your flight information. So we have Loki, who is to have gotten a ticket from some guy at the start of this thing, And so we have some other guy who completely refused to get a ticket, and he gets in front of Loki. So this guy goes all the way up to the front, and since this guy didn't get a ticket, he got obliterated and killed. And so we have Loki who's like scrambling to find his ticket and like, oh, thank God. So we have Loki who makes it to the front of this line, and so they end up like explaining this to Loki what is all going on in a very cartoonish like manner, kind of like how they explained um, uh, like uh, uh, like when Thor was going through the whole Grandmaster thing and how they were explaining Grandmaster and like explaining his world and everything like that. Sakaar, like when like Thor's getting explained about Sakaar, same kind of thing, but Loki's not strapped into a chair. He's just watching this thing off of a TV, having them explain to him about this whole world and how this guy is a variant. And so, since this guy is a variant, a time variant, really he has to go to a judge to seek judgment, and he has to either mention whether he is guilty or not guilty of being a time variant, because uh, this was something that he was not supposed to do, and so he is to have to be judged for the wrongdoings that he has done, and so and plus and so we have these like time uh, judgers that are going to eventually tell this judge what the heck to do. And so we have Loki who goes into this trial of sorts, and he has no real lawyer. And so we have this judge that is asking if Loki is innocent or guilty of creating a time variant, and Loki is like, well, like, I'm guilty of being the god of mischief, yes, like, I'm guilty of a number of things. And then eventually Loki also tries to use his power because he's like, I'm also guilty of this. And so we have Loki try to use his power, and it fails, kind of like how Thor tried to use his power while talking to the Grandmaster in that chair, like, I'm the god of thunder, and then sparkles just come out of his hand, and so that's when Jeff Goldblum just calls the god of Thor Sparkles the whole entire time. So we have we have Loki who is trying to use his powers and failing. He can't use his power, and so we have Obius who is to be Owen Wilson. And so we have Obius who is going to some location to talk to some kid. And it seems like there was a villainous person who was to attack someone. And so we have Mobius who is asking this kid, like, hey, what did you see? And we have this kid who points at this symbol that looks like the devil. And so we have Mobius is like, oh, okay, like, thanks for helping us out here. And so we have Mobius who is to go and to talk with the judge of Loki's trial, and to ask that he is able to talk with Loki, and the judge, of course, grants him to do so. So we have Loki and Mobius who are to go on and have Loki sit in Mobius's office, while Mobius is to showcase to him what all had happened in the Avengers movie, and then what is going to happen in Thor 2. That eventually his mother, spoiler alert, is going to die. So, and his mother is going to die because of Loki telling the guy to go up the stairs to the left and basically just kill off his own mother. Loki is frightened about this information. He's like, how is it that I was the one to have had my own mother die. Like, this makes no sense to me. And so we eventually have Mobius, who is to leave the room for important reasons. And while that is going on, we have Loki, who is to start scrolling through his entire life. Every single bit of tender moments, like losing also Loki's father, having Thor talking to him and mentioned that at some point both. Loki and Thor, like Thor saw the best in Loki, blah blah blah. That eventually, like, if you've seen the movies, you've seen them, um, and so on and so forth. We have eventually Loki also seeing the moment of his death against Thanos, and so again, if you haven't seen any of these movies, it's spoiling everything. So we have Loki, who is to see his entire life scroll before his eyes, and we have Morbius, who is to come back. And so we have Loki, who is starting to, in a very Scrooge-like manner, starting to just go like, you know what, like all the things that I did were just to strike fear in others, but I didn't really want to hurt and murder anybody. Like, yeah, because Mobius is mentioning it's like, well, hey, like, yeah, you're the god of mischief, but what have you really done that has really been mischievous? If anything, like what you have done has just created a lot of your enemies to be the best and or better of themselves, and a lot of times you have lost, and I mean a lot. So what have you really done to what what is your life's great meaning, is really what Mobius is trying to ask Loki, and Loki can't really get to that answer. And so we eventually have Mobius, uh, who is to eventually leave this room yet again. And so Loki is to eventually have this Minuteman go and try to retrieve. Or no, wait, back it up. So when Mobius is to leave his office, we have Loki, who is to have taken um, Mobius's uh, controller over Loki, and so that's when Loki ends up running around this location. He ends up taking the Tesseract, and so Mobius ends up running off after Loki, and Loki goes right back into Mobius's office because he has nowhere to go. Because even the Tesseract is very weak in this location. We have a lot of these people who are using Infinity Stones as paperweights because these things have zero effect in the location that they are in. So really we have it to where Loki cannot do anything with the actual Tesseract because the Tesseract in this location is basically nerfed and has no real true power. To where Loki is really just using his power to get around. So that's when eventually Mobius is to come back to his own office, because he notices that Loki had no real place to go. So, and that's when Loki realizes that he didn't really mean to really and truly hurt anybody or to kill anyone. It was just to strike fear in everyone, to make him. Because we have Mobius who's asking Loki early on in this, before the whole "This Is Your Life" footage, like, what is your whole real scheme, grand scheme of things? And Loki said to rule, and Mobius is like, well, where do you want to rule? And then Loki's like, well, I wanted to rule Midgard. And it's like, man, that seems kind of like a boring job, like just ruling. Like that doesn't really seem very like that just kind of seems like a boring kind of thing to do. It's like, what are you gonna do after you rule Earth? It's like, well, I'm gonna rule Asgard, and it's like, oh, okay, so you're gonna rule Asgard? Oh, great. Like, well, then what do you do after you rule Asgard? And Loki's like, well, I'm going to rule space, and like, and Mobius is like, oh, okay, so Loki, the ruler of space. You know how goofy that sounds? So, like, really, Mobius is trying as much as possible to push to punch a bunch of holes into the logic of Loki of what his true grand tiding meaning is, and like what he's supposed to be on this atmosphere doing, whether it's Asgard, whether it's Earth, whether it is any other seemingly location. And so we have Loki, who is to eventually just like, dude, I have nowhere to go. So, like, the Tesseract is meaningless here. So, I guess I'm going to tie myself onto Mobius because I have nothing better to do. I'm stuck. So, we have Mobius and Loki kind of looking around this location, and we have Loki who is looking outside of this spot, and it looks like a ton of space like environments, like uh as if it's like this location is somewhere in mid space. To where we have Loki who's like, well, is this magic? And Mobius is like, no. So we have Loki, who is going to have to basically be forced to do what Mobius wants, and to go and fight some villain. And Loki's like, well, who is the villain then? And Mobius is like, well, the villain is actually you, Loki. You are going to be your own villain in your own show. And immediately I just kind of scoffed at this. I'm like, wow, like what lazy writing. So, in other words, we're probably going to have like a another variant Loki that is like, I'm assuming what happens is like we have a Loki that never died from Endgame, and lit, like I'm assuming that this could be like some kind of modified timeline Loki that never died in Endgame and always aligned himself with Thanos, and like maybe that's gonna be it. Like maybe we're gonna have a Loki from a different timeline that like beat the Avengers or this or that. Like we're gonna have a Loki that continue to stay villainous forever, to show Loki that he needs to kind of change his tune and become a hero. Because basically, like, that's the only thing that he can do. And then once he is probably done with this fighting himself like story, I bet right after that, he is probably going to get reset and probably forget every single thing that he has ever done in this show. And it's just going to go right back to him going back to the opening of Thor 2, uh, The Dark World, to where we are probably going to have Loki who is to have gone right back to where he was in either Endgame, or where he was to get to Thor: The Dark World. So basically, probably all of this stuff is probably going to be all wiped clean, and then we, I guess, are just supposed to understand how Loki changed from being this menacing person to now being a much more uh, person that is kind of wanting to eventually tie himself on to being with Thor, and helping him through the other films. Like, I don't think it's going to be any more than that, and I think I am going to say that, yeah, I think that's all that I'm probably going to say about this review. So, really, like, this episode didn't have much of anything of real interest to me. I'm much more interested in the later episodes. We'll see what happens with those because really this is too early to really go out of my way to say that this show is going to be completely a waste of time. But I don't think that I'm also going to like. I already feel like I'm not going to get anything out of the show. I already like realized that it's like okay, so this is just going to be another Loki like yeah, it's great that he did this, but like basically by the very end of this show, we're not going to feel the difference. Um, we're not going to feel the difference. It's going to be WandaVision all over again, where like the ending of that show will not affect, I think, a future MCU project, or I don't think we're going to see this show affect how we are going to see Loki in the future because I don't even know if we're going to have a second season out of this. We could because if Loki is a real true time variant, we could have it to where Loki just is continuing to exist in this alternate timeline, but that other Loki still actually does and truly exist. And yeah, that could happen too. So with that said, I think I am just gonna get out of here. Like a lot of this was just a recap episode, or a lot of it was just like, okay, there's nothing here. And eventually I'm just like, that's kind of just how like WandaVision was for me, where there was just nothing there. To where I was like just kinda like, okay, like when are we gonna get something like exciting besides the whole thromp of Loki just being like stuck in this time headquarters thing. I'm like, when are we gonna get beyond that? And we didn't. And I'm assuming we're gonna like continue to be stuck with having Loki be in this time headquarters spot for a bulk of this show. And then eventually, probably Loki is going to have to come in. Evil Loki is going to have to come into the fray of the show, and then actual Loki is going to have to do some actual work. But yeah, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, Ray. Goodbye, everybody.